Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Today, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about the lonely leader. I know, don't click off. Don't click off. Okay. This isn't a woe is me video. Okay. There is going to be a fragment or a portion of you who are going to say, oh, lonely leader. And then there are going to be those and saying, I'm not lonely, that sort of thing. And there are going to be those of you going, I wonder what you're going to talk about. And you would exactly be correct. Today, we're just going to talk a little bit in and around the idea of leadership and the element of loneliness that accompanies it, right? And so, what we're not really talking about is this woe is me, nobody gets me, although that can be a thing, right? It could be a thing for any human, right? But what we're talking about really is, and this wouldn't matter if we're talking about a leader of an organization, a civic organization, anything within culture, families, friend groups, whatever, anywhere where you're kind of a leader. And and also keep this in mind. We're all leaders in the making. If you have young children and you're early in life starting out, or maybe not early in life, but whatever, but you have young children, I'm telling you what, nothing will teach you how to manage better than managing young children, right? And definitely teenagers if you want to be put through the ringer. So so this doesn't just apply to those who are, what you think of as a leader, sitting, some CEO sitting atop some hill somewhere with a crown affixed to the top of their head. This is really anyone within their whole development of life, right? So you, all of us can ingest this at the level that we operate and the ones that we want to operate in, because we're going to talk a little bit around much of those. Okay. All right. So the lonely leader, what are we really getting at here? Well, a leader essentially, and not always accurately, will try to put way more on their shoulders than they need to. A leader, especially if they're still in the developing phases, and this is kind of be a foot stomp or an asterisk for those developing, is to be a really good leader is you have to understand that you cannot get anything accomplished without the team. You just can't. The team is so vital to your success that if you don't find a way, right, to delegate responsibility and then develop trust within that framework of your support group and staff, so forth, and the broader team at large. If you can't do that, then you're going to struggle as a leader because your team needs you to be doing things that matter to, that the leader would do. Obviously, lead the team, right? Coach, lead, mentor, do all those good, vital, internal, important things, but also the external things too, right? Kind of see what's going on within broader culture. What are some of the things we think that are affecting the organization? Good, bad, or indifferent. All of the things, okay? But a leader can, over time, feel more and more lonely because who do they have to confide in? They have very few to confide in. They have other leaders, but then, of course, there's this little thing called pride and ego, right? It likes to dance its way into our mind and tell us, oh, well, I'm not going to ask for help, or I'm not going to ask for mentoring, or hey, how did you handle this? Although very good leaders, very wise leaders do that, right? They will do that. But that being said, very good leaders will also go out and try to find out and learn for themselves and figure it out too, right? So you do have a mix, and it really, that mix just depends on your abilities and your capabilities, right? So, but what can happen is the leader, if they're not careful, especially during a leader's development through much of our organizational, professional lives, and so on, and personal lives for that matter, if they begin to feel like they're on an island and nobody gets them, nobody gets what they have to deal with, and all the things, if you start to fall into that rut, into that mindset, it can actually be internally toxic. And you can find yourself in a bit of a hall of mirrors now, to where you're projecting, perhaps even onto your own team, things that don't even really exist, right? Oh, well, they don't get me, or they're not really here for the right reasons. Now, these things can also be true. This is where the tricky part is. Some people may just be there for the paycheck, right? Some people may be there for the wrong reason. Some people don't get the vision, even if they know the vision, have read the vision, they've been told what the vision is. Maybe they've been there for a while. They should get the vision, but some people just don't digest the vision. Their baseline of development is, hey, I'm just here for a paycheck, and yeah, okay, you have a vision, great, okay, and it's to minimize a little bit, right? Because no one wants to feel second to everything else going on. But the reality is we're all first and we're all second. Okay. The customer is first, but no, we are also first. But in describing that, we can't both be first, right? So we're both always going to be customer first, and then understanding through, especially if you've ever been exposed to TQM, total quality management. If you've ever been exposed to that, everybody is your customer, right? And everybody is your supplier for that matter. And what do you think that means? That means that you are also your customer. When you serve your customer, you're also serving yourself, right? So it's a loop. It just creates a loop. And that feedback loop keeps things motoring along. And these are the things that build what some would call self-esteem, that sort of thing, whatever. But it would build up your internal reliance and satisfaction with your own, performance with your life in general, right? Because hey, I'm taking care of customers, things are going good for me, boom, right? Reciprocal relationship, and that works good. Now it doesn't work good if, and now we're talking, that was using team members for an example, but back to the leader now. If the leader feels that doesn't exist, if they're not certain about it, this is why communication is so vital. This is why your daily management walks are so vital. This is why your Gemba walks, daily management walks, are so vital, because you have to stay connected. The other side of this too is so that you don't fall in the pitfall of feeling, kind of feeling sorry for yourself, really. And it might be micro. We're not talking like some major thing, but it might just be a micro feeling, right? We'll call it a micro feeling. I just made that up. But a micro feeling, right? You may have a micro feeling and it may be a little unsettling. And maybe there's some reality to it. So you don't want to gaslight your intuition. But I am saying is you don't want to fall into the trap. Because if you start, essentially seeing ghosts everywhere, that's all you're ever going to see, right? So you have to be open-minded enough to put it in the proper context and say, look, this one thing is true, but this isn't true for the entire team. Or this may be true in this instance, and this may have just been a thing. And I just need to communicate to make sure we're all on board. I don't need to freak out. I don't need to, get all wound up around the axle about it. I just need to communicate with my team. Now, one way that you can avoid this pitfall, right? And this is a challenge. This is a leadership challenge. You need to be, I'm going to say it, I'm going to use the B word. You need to be vulnerable. Well, how do you do that if pride and ego is your shield and your sword, and you're going out there and you're taking care of the customer and being a warrior for the customer? Well, it's to realize that underneath all of that, when you take all your warrior armor off, you put your sword and your shield down, it's you and your team vulnerable, right? Sitting around the round table, we use the King Arthur scenario. You're sitting around the round table, and at a certain point, you can't always be armored up. You have to express how you feel about some things, and you need to let your team express those things as well. You may have fears and concerns. You may have some real legitimate things that that you're uneasy about. You know what? If you're vulnerable enough to bring it up, then they're going to be vulnerable enough to also express themselves. This will allow all of you to understand one another, and now you have a natural working toward the center, toward working to make sure that these concerns don't become a reality, right? It isn't to be vulnerable, isn't to say, oh, I don't, this fear, although you may have a fear. It isn't to say that it's always going to be a fear, though. It could be a concern. It could be this is what I'm sensing, but I don't know if that's valid or not. And and I don't want us to go down this path because I don't think that'd be real beneficial for us. these sorts of things. And of course, I'm talking to varied people. So you're going to come from different industries. So it's going to be different for each of you, especially as well in your development. You may not be the CEO, you may not be the president or the group leader and all these things, directors. You may be an up and coming team member, right? A lead, a supervisor, a department manager, so forth, right? So you're still building on some of your skill sets and so forth. And that's even more difficult to set that pride and ego down and to be vulnerable with your team, because what you might think can happen. If you're vulnerable, there may be those who try to take advantage of your vulnerability, right? That's okay. It's essentially you're giving your team rope. You're giving your team rope. You're saying, hey, I'm concerned about these things. Now, if they start to manifest those things into reality, it's going to be pretty obvious if somebody's actually trying to create that condition versus if your team's working hard to make sure that that your productivity and your ability to serve the customer is on an ascending glide slope, right? Versus a downward trend, right? So you're going to see pretty easily if somebody's shoving that wheel down the hill versus somebody who's working together with others to make sure that we're moving upward in our performance and how we conduct business, right? It's no different in culture. It's no different in relationships. It's no different anywhere. We can have fears and concerns. We can have the micro to the macro, right? Some things may be real and your intuition may be telling you some things, but just I caution you, don't let the loneliness of others maybe not understanding you go left unchecked. It's quite possible you haven't expressed yourself enough and you haven't shown enough vulnerability. And by doing more of that, right? And I don't mean every day you come in and you're vulnerable, right? Part of being vulnerable is just showing or telling folks and making them understand how much you care. I care that my team is doing well and they're taken care of, and that XYZ had a medical thing, and oh, I'm so glad everything's good. Let's send some flowers and cards and get well, blah blah blah, visit them, that kind of thing, whatever, right? So many scenarios, and it's not just emergency situations. This could be day to day stuff too, right? But what you don't want to do, you just want to be careful about. I'm not saying you don't want to do it, because again, you're going to have to read the room for your own organization and for how you are. Your silo might be to never leave your sword and shield outside of your grasp. Okay. It may be that you're always girded up, ready for battle. Well, you can't do that. You're going to burn out. And the way around that is to be vulnerable. You want your team picking up their sword and shield and working hard and being warriors for the customer, so that you're not always having to do it. Because if you're having to do all of that and if they're not really imbibed and bought into the vision and bought into the customer aspect of what you do for product and service, right? If they're not bought into it, you're going to do all of that. You're going to burn out, and then you're going to move on, because you're going to basically say, well, this group isn't XYZ. Well, I'm here to tell you, before you let that site leader go or all these things, we can coach them up. Okay, we can coach them up and start with vulnerability, because if you're vulnerable with your team, you might be very surprised to see how they show up. People will show up when you're vulnerable and you put how you feel from the heart, very genuinely, and you let them know how you feel and all the things. You will be very surprised to see. And it doesn't mean everybody is going to step up and go bananas, but it does mean that people will step up. Most folks are going to step up. The ones who are going to stick with you to battle for the customer, they're definitely going to step up. But don't be afraid of the vulnerable aspect. Okay, and that'll help alleviate some of this loneliness too, because you'll be able to communicate a little bit more. Now, this isn't to say you don't want mentors who are your peers, say in other sites or other businesses and whatever. Obviously, you got to contain some of that, right? Because we can't just be letting all of our, we take care of our own laundry in our own building type of thing. But, but all that being said, You still need to have folks that you can counsel with, right? It could be that pastor, priest, or counselor. You may just straight up go to a counselor because you have the privacy and all that, just to blow off steam a little bit, if you need to. The other part of that, that loneliness thing is being connected with people outside of your work, right? So if you're involved in sports or activities and these sorts of things, any social interaction is going to do you well. Heck, it might be that you just go cruise through Walmart and go shopping and say hello to every bloody person you know, right? So whatever your methodology is, and there will be many methodologies, stay connected to folks. And when you do that, you're going to find that it kind of settles your energy a little bit better, right? So don't ever feel lonely beyond more than the initial. Sometimes that loneliness, it's okay to feel that way. Sometimes we need to be solo for a while to just think and reflect and to ingest and marinate. It might be because you need to think about some things and then strategize for yourself. Hey, I need to communicate with my team on these things, right? But don't make these things so rigid that all you're asking them every single time is to grip their sword tighter and their shield tighter and so on and so forth. Everything is more, tighter, more, right? Make sure that you're allowing them to express themselves, right? And some may feel, well, this is a little too touchy feely, da da da. Look, folks, if you are strong enough to hold up your shield and your sword and do battle for the customer, don't be coward to be able to put those down and understand that your heart is your best tool for getting anything done. The love that you have inside of you essentially is, and touchy feely or not, that is your source of strength. Without your heart, you wouldn't have the drive or the willingness to even consider, even though you might think, well, my intellect tells me to pick up that shield and that sword to do battle for my customer and get wins for them. True. Our heart or our mind, our intellect is a tool for us to use to do those things. But it's all coming from the heart. It's all coming from that capacity for you to understand that underneath it all, your customers, and this is really what you're doing. Why are you fighting so hard for your customer? Because you want them to have thriving, growing, loving lives, right? Personally and professionally. You should want that also for your team. And you should also want that for yourself. And if you have very genuine conversations around these things, you're going to find that it's easier and easier to be vulnerable, and to the point where you don't even feel like you need to grip that sword super tight or that shield super tight. We're just operating at a high level just because we get one another, and then you start to synergize. You start to almost spirals wrapping together. Rope, think of rope, strands of rope, right, that come together, wrap together to become a very strong rope, right? This is what you're doing when you allow that synergy to occur. But that synergy can't occur if those strands are too rigid. They have to be flexible enough, and they aren't flexible unless you're being vulnerable, okay? Hopefully that analogy hits the mark. All right, folks. Didn't want to go too long today. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage folks. And then what you're going to find is not only are we helping to improve culture and all aspects of it, right? But we're also improving our own lives. And that's an amazing thing. Never take that for granted. All right, folks. Have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.